Today I want to talk about my revised approach to learning kanji characters for Japanese. And my approach to this has been changing and evolving over the last 5 or 6 months of learning Japanese. And I thought now would be a good point to share the approach I've been using because over the last few months I've stumbled on a formula that seems to be working quite nicely for me. The original approach that I took for learning kanji was based on the work of Gabriel Weiner, who is the author of the book Fluent Forever. The basis for this method is that we're going to use mnemonic images and flashcards to memorize kanji. Now, we begin by not learning kanji characters, but by learning the smaller pieces that make them up, and these are called radicals. So we would begin by using a website like Kanji Damage to break down a character into its component pieces and make mnemonics for all of those. To memorize these mnemonic images, we're going to use two types of flashcards. One that shows us the radical and asks us what the image is, and another that shows us the image and asks us to recall the radical. When you go to learn a character that contains multiple component pieces, the idea is to combine all of your mnemonic images into a short little story that helps you remember the character. So for example, we can combine Mohawk and Baby to get the character for it to study or learn. And we can remember this by thinking that this Mohawk baby is some kind of student. To memorize these stories, we're going to use two more flashcards. One of them is the kanji story flashcard, which will ask us to recall all of the mnemonic images for that character, as well as the story that combines them. And the other kind of flashcard is a stroke order test. And when I was using these flashcards, I did not actually test myself literally on the stroke order, but I did use it as a way to make sure that I remembered all of the strokes. Either way, this helps reinforce the story for this kanji. Since we're learning kanji in the context of words, we need a few more flashcards to memorize these words. The first would be an oral production card, where you have to correctly say the word. And ideally, you would do this with a blanked out sentence, but for the first words that you learn, you can also use pictures by themselves. Next is a reading comprehension card, where you see the word written in kanji, and you have to know how to say it and what its meaning is. And finally, we have one last flashcard for this word, and this tests us on the final kanji combination spelling for a word that uses multiple kanji. And that is the approach in a nutshell. And you'll find that this works pretty well for most characters that are relatively simple. However, you'll find that once the characters get more complex and contain more pieces, it gets a bit difficult to remember those stories. So let's take a look at the kanji character for yume, or a dream. Using my own personal mnemonics, this is flowers, a net, a mustache, and a tire. In theory, you can still use the same approach of creating a story to combine those four elements, but once you start having more component pieces, it becomes harder to remember those stories, especially when you're trying to memorize hundreds or potentially thousands of kanji characters. So to solve this problem, Gabe created something called a kanji signature flashcard. The purpose of this flashcard is for you to recall the first two component pieces of the character as a single image. So in this case, that means creating a single image for flowers and net. And so if you can recall flower net first, you'll find that oftentimes that jogs your memory enough to recall the rest of the character. Okay, so this again works pretty well for a while. However, when the kanji get more complex, it starts to break down again. So let's consider, for example, the second character in the word shinzo, or a heart. This is a mess. Using my personal mnemonic images, I can break this character down into moon, flowers, cliff, confetti, spear, leftovers, and some other extra stuff that doesn't really know what it is. Now, you could try and make a story involving all of those things, and you might even succeed. But my guess is that it's going to be very hard to remember, and at the very least, it's going to take you a lot of time to recall this story, even if you can do it correctly. So this approach is not going to work. We could also use the kanji signature card, which would help us a little bit in remembering moon and flowers. However, we still have a whole lot of other stuff left after that. It's at this point that Gabe recommends that you actually start doing what you did for the kanji signatures, but for everything. Meaning, let's also learn every combination of 2 or 3 radicals that we encounter in a character. So in this case, we can combine cliff and spear into something that resembles a character, meaning become. And we can symbolize that with the image of a butterfly, because a caterpillar becomes a butterfly. We can also combine leftovers and this other extra junk into a maid. Then we can actually take this one step further and combine butterfly and maid into a new combination, which is a combination of combinations. And then this whole piece becomes a warehouse. And so now when we want to recall this character, we simply have to remember Moon Warehouse. So that is the original approach, and it is an effective one. However, it can be time consuming to study since you're spending a lot of time on each character, and it can also at times feel a bit complicated and, for me personally, a bit frustrating. One of the benefits of using a spaced repetition system is that your studies are very efficient. It felt at times like I was overworking or overlearning a little bit, and this would manifest itself as frustration in seeing a bunch of questions about the same kanji and perceiving very little benefit from those added flashcards. So it's at this point that I began to question some things and start experimenting with some modifications. This process began with me questioning, why am I learning kanji? I came to the realization that what was important to me was primarily reading and a basic ability to write in the form of typing, meaning that writing kanji out by hand was not important to me, as long as I can write emails and texts and things of that nature. Now, having clarified my goals and priorities, I began to ask questions in order to address the issues that I was facing. Number one, is there a way that I can remove elements and still retain 80 to 90% of the benefit? This would allow me to get through more material in less time. Number two, is there a way I can simplify this? Number three, is there a way I can modify this approach to be more enjoyable while still getting 80 to 90% of the benefits? And number four, since reading is my priority, can I remove production elements and still retain my ability to read kanji? Now, this last point is one of the key factors that led to some of these changes I'm about to discuss. And if you want to hear an in-depth discussion on that subject alone, check out the video that I made a couple weeks ago titled, How Important is Kanji Production? Now, let's take a look at the changes that I've made and the new approach that I'm currently using to learn kanji. This is a personalized approach for my personal goals. Due to the time constraints of this one-year challenge, I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of quality in certain areas for speed. That means that some things will slip through the cracks. I will occasionally forget things, but this is a sacrifice I'm willing to make in order to get to an intermediate level in Japanese more quickly. So these are always things that I can go in and fill in later on if I want. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the new approach. I now begin the same way that I did before, and that is to learn radicals before I learn characters. Second, eliminate the kanji signature flashcards entirely. The point of these flashcards was to create a single mnemonic image for the first 2 pieces of any given kanji character. We not only want to make a single image for the first 2 pieces, we actually want to do this for every combination of 2 to 3 radicals that we encounter. Third, eliminate the kanji story flashcards. Instead, we want to keep making more mnemonics. Fourth, stop using stroke order flashcards. While I do believe these have some value, they were by far my least favorite flashcard to actually study. As soon as I eliminated these from my decks, it freed up a whole lot of mental energy that I could then apply to absorbing more words and kanji. But to get away with this, we have to make sure our mnemonics are solid. Keep chunking radicals and component pieces into bigger and bigger chunks with the ultimate goal of having one single image per kanji character. And you'll find that doing this makes it very easy to recall a word that has multiple kanji characters in it. Take, for example, keitai denwa. This has 4 characters, and if we have a single image for each of those, we can simply remember portable, belt, electric, talk. And this greatly simplifies our process in dealing with kanji. You can chunk up into these bigger and bigger pieces, but only after you have broken down the character into its smaller components first. Personally, I shoot to have ideally 2 or at most 3 component pieces per mnemonic. Anything more than that becomes hard to remember. I have found that I have never once regretted making an extra mnemonic flashcard because it always makes my life easier and makes it easier to recall and produce those characters. So now that we've dealt with learning kanji characters, we simply have to deal with learning the word, and we're going to do that in the same way that we did previously, and that is to have 3 more flashcards, one for oral production, one for reading comprehension, and finally one for kanji spelling. So in closing, this approach has been very helpful for me. It's made my study sessions more efficient, more effective. This approach is simpler since we've gone from 7 flashcard types to 4. And finally, this has made my study sessions significantly more enjoyable. And since one of the key factors in success with learning any language or taking on any big project is being able to show up every day and do the work, making it enjoyable makes it a lot more likely that you will succeed. To conclude, I have a special treat for you in the video description below. I've received a ton of requests from many different people to upload either my flashcard decks or my flashcard models for their own use. At this point, uploading my actual flashcards themselves is a bit of a technical nightmare. I only have one Japanese deck and everything is mixed in, including content that I've paid for and copyrighted stuff, etc. So separating what is not copyrighted from what is honestly an impossible task, especially while I'm trying to learn Japanese. I just don't have the time to do that this year. However, I can spare you the time of creating so I have included a download link to that in the video description. This will allow you to make flashcards like I'm using, and if you do have access to pre-made decks, and there are a number of popular ones floating around out there for Japanese, if you are using one of those, this will allow you to very quickly import thousands of flashcards at once. So while I cannot at this point create your flashcards for you, I can at least offer you a way to create flashcards like them. I will make another video discussing how to use this flashcard model deck. It's based on Gabe's Fluent Forever flashcard model, but I've made a few modifications that I like personally. So you can find links to that in the video description. With all of that being said, thank you for watching, and see you later. Bye.